All right, man, peace. Brother, CJ McCollum, the great shooting guard of the Portland Trail Blazers, he reminds me of one of these high school chicks who does not like a guy until one of her homegirls tells him or her, in this scenario, that she likes a guy. And a lot of you brothers may be familiar with this situation where you might have got a lot of chicks just because one female told a group of her friends that they found you attractive. Why am I saying this? Because CJ McCollum is coming out against quote-unquote super teams. And why do I believe he's doing this? Because he's not good enough to be recruited by a super team. You'll find that many of the guys who are the most overt against quote-unquote super teams, at least in this era, tend to be the guys who have a very slim chance of being recruited by one. CJ McCollum is never going to be recruited by the Golden State Warriors. So therefore he has to quote-unquote hate on the concept. But if they ever called, believe me, he would try to join that team as soon as possible. So anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Let's get focused, people. So a month after calling Kevin Durant's move to Golden State soft on Twitter, CJ McCollum isn't backing off on how he feels about super teams in an interview with CCTV. Let me read you some quotes. "I would never do anything of that nature. I think that's disgusting. I think some players will take that route, but most guys have too much pride."
No, most guys are not good enough to be qualified to be asked or recruited to join a super team. In order for you to join the Avengers, you have to be a superhero already. And brother, you're not a superhero. You're just a very good guard in the NBA. You should be proud of your career. But the Golden State Warriors will never come calling for you on your best day. You will never be Klay Thompson. I say that with all due love and respect.
They want to really win on their own or in their certain organizations and aren't going to just jump on the bandwagon. So, in response to the Score posting the quote with the caption, "CJ McCollum really hates ring chasing," he replied, "Y'all say bringing up old stuff. Y'all got me out here looking like a bitter ex. One of the best teams ever assembled with two players you could argue are top 15 greatest to lace them up."
I think that you can argue that, but right now it's an outside argument. I think that by the time Steph Curry's and Kevin Durant's careers are over, you'll definitely be able to make a case for them being top 15 all time, and maybe in the case of Kevin Durant, an outside chance that you could argue him for top 10. But it depends on what type of numbers and how many championships he ends his career with. If Durant ends his career with 5 or 6 chips, 35,000 points, so on and so forth, maybe another regular season MVP, he will definitely have an argument for being one of the top 10 players of all time. One of the arguments that will be used against him, though, of course, is that he went to the Golden State Warriors, and he was never universally considered the alpha on that team. Steph Curry, I think, will end his career with an outside chance of being considered a top 15 all-time great player. But right now, I'm not quite sure. But when you look at his credentials, the brother's a 3-time world champion. He's a 2-time regular season MVP. There are very few players in the history of the league that have those type of credentials, especially being someone who just turned 30. So we'll see how things end for the both of them.
4 Hall of Famers with another one on the way. I'm happy to stop making me look like a scorned man. Sheesh. Stephen A. So people think CJ looks pretty salty here, but do you blame him?
Well, I don't blame him, but I do appreciate his tweet, because if you said something months ago and then it resurfaces now like you just said it yesterday or whatever the case may be, it does make you look worse than you.
Well, if we're going to reverse engineer that, Stephen A. Smith, I think that it makes his argument, his little banter back and forth with Kevin Durant, look worse. Because that means that he already had those feelings in his heart when he had that interview a few months ago, and then he brought that out with KD. And the fact of the matter is that, like KD stated so well, why are you even worried about us? You're about 3-4 levels underneath the Golden State Warriors. The Portland Trail Blazers have no chance of beating Golden State. If Kevin Durant and Steph Curry get hurt, then they might be somewhere on the same level of the Golden State Warriors. Maybe. Please keep in mind, in 2016, when the Golden State Warriors did not even have Steph Curry for the first 3 games of that series, the Golden State Warriors were up 2-1, with just Klay Thompson and Draymond Green going against Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. With Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, they're not even good enough, I don't think. The Trail Blazers are not even good enough to be considered a sparring partner for the Golden State Warriors.
than you actually should, because you commented about it a long time ago and you let it go, and somebody's bringing it up as if you're still harping on it. So I definitely appreciate his clarification in that regard. What I will say, however, is that I don't think he should be having his podcast, inviting guys on, and then allowing this kind of stuff to circulate about it.
Absolutely, because it makes him look very unprofessional. If you're going to go into the NBA media world, you're going to have to disassociate yourself from your personal feelings.
Because it does make him look bad. But I don't have a problem with his frustration here. What CJ McCollum, who was a career 17-point per game scorer, averaged 21 last year, obviously the second best player on the team in Portland, and dropped some dimes in the playoffs against the Pelicans. What he's saying here is that I want to compete against guys, not join them. Part of recognizing your level of greatness is going up against greatness, as opposed to joining forces with them. And it's one thing for it to happen. It's another thing entirely for us to speak about it while having no problem with it whatsoever, because it compromises the level of competition that we're selling our sport on. Now, the NBA's popularity has elevated and continues to elevate. A matter of fact, I don't think it's going to be long before they usurp the NFL and things keep transcending the way that they are.
Well, first off, brother, I think that you mean trending, not transcending. But number two, I totally disagree with you. I think that if the NFL is able to button up that Colin Kaepernick national anthem protest, the quote-unquote national anthem protest, they'll be right back to business, because the NBA is not particularly close to the NFL right now. But I do think that your statement or your sentiment is a bit of a hint at what the mainstream liberal sports media wants to happen. You guys want the NBA to surpass the NFL because the NBA is a woke league. But I don't think that it's going to happen as long as the NFL owners get their act together.
Because the NBA is doing a marvelous job of promoting its product, building its brand, and attacking issues the way they need to be tackled at the same time.
No, they tackle issues according to what their corporate sponsors like, particularly Nike, because their top shelf athletes are predominantly Nike athletes. And Nike is a quote-unquote woke corporation. They're involved with brand building, not just for themselves, but for their athletes. And they like, especially for their black athletes, to be considered messiah figures. LeBron James, Kevin Durant, particularly Serena Williams, they want to give them godlike attributes.
Certainly doing a better job than the NFL. But the flip side to it is that you want to see guys spread out so you can contribute to selling the sport by saying these guys are going up against these guys. And when there's an absence of that in any way, particularly when you have stars or guys on the rise, literally in the NBA, literally speaking against these things, then it elevates the level of substance to the argument against that stuff going on. And that's what I think we have to pay attention to here with CJ McCollum, Max. He's a frustrated individual because who's coming to Portland as a free agent of their own free will? What star do you know is going to say, you know what, I'm going to roll to Portland and join my man Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum in Portland? They ain't trying to do that, which is why Damian Lillard, even though he loves Portland, wouldn't mind being in LA, but even more so wouldn't mind being in New York.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, you touched on a lot of points there, but I think that the main point that you implied, that in my view the NBA is going to have to think about if they're as serious about having competitive balance as they act like they are, is they're going to have to contract a lot of these teams. I think that there are just far too many teams in the NBA right now, and it makes it appear as if there are more barren wasteland teams than there actually should be. The Charlotte Hornets, the Memphis Grizzlies, do we really need them in the NBA? Do we need the Orlando Magic in the NBA? Why can't Florida just have one team? Maybe you could change the name of the Miami Heat to the Florida Heat. There's just a lot of teams in the NBA that I don't think need to be there. And I think that it gives the appearance that many of the teams throughout the NBA are actually minor league franchises or farm system teams for the major teams, especially if they don't know how to build up their corporation, aka their franchise, like the Golden State Warriors do, who built mostly through the draft.
Hear that, kids? LA or New York, Damian Lillard. Wouldn't mind either one.
He says, I'm told he prefers New York even over LA, just so you know.
Isn't that something? I had one of these Damian Lillard fans come at me in the comments. Oh, Damian didn't say he wants to leave. You got to do your research. Dude, Damian Lillard has already developed this cult of personality around him based upon quote-unquote loyalty. And that's why I state that many of these players, they like to push this loyalty nonsense when they're 22 and 23 years old. And then they get 28, 29, and their professional sports biological clock starts ticking. And they say to themselves, I really only have about 2 or 3 more years where I'm going to be at my peak as an NBA athlete. And I need to be able to go to a team that's going to put me in the best position to win. Because I don't want to be Patrick Ewing. I don't want to be Reggie Miller. I don't want to be Charles Barkley or John Stockton. I want to win while and if I can. And they start to change their tune. That's why I state one of the main reasons why CJ McCollum is coming against super teams with so much vitriol is because he knows that he'll never be good enough to be recruited by one of these super teams. Never.
Boy, the Knicks would love him. And Knicks fans would. CJ McCollum is essentially saying, let the fates decide. He doesn't want to take responsibility for which team he winds up on. I understand that. A lot of players feel, talking about baseball before, old school about that. You know, if luck decides it, you get drafted to a team whose superstar was injured, so they picked first in the draft, and they lucked out in the lottery, and they take you, and then the superstar comes back, Tim Duncan, you know, gets to play with David Robinson, and win championships.
Or in the case of Cleveland, Kyrie Irving and LeBron James.
Or, you know, you have a great GM who assembles an incredible team. As long as you're not doing it, the player, that's okay. In other words, it's not about he wants to compete against them, not join them. It's that he doesn't want to join them unless he is joined to them by someone else. Look, I don't expect him to be happy that Thanos got the 5th Infinity Stone. You know, like DeMarcus Cousins signed with these guys, and in the playoffs, watch him get healthy, and then it's just impossible, right?
Well, the Golden State Warriors actually are not Thanos. They're actually the Avengers. It's LeBron James who's Thanos.
All the superheroes die now because the Warriors can't be stopped. I don't expect CJ McCollum stuck up in Portland. By the way, by his own doing, he signed the extension for over $80 million. I don't blame him. I'd have done the same thing probably, but if I were him. But still, you're right. Who are they going to get up in Portland? They got a good GM. Apparently not as good as the Warriors. They have an okay market. Not as good as the Warriors and some others. CJ McCollum feels that it's kind of undermines competition maybe, or maybe his competitive fire, were he to make the decision to join forces with more star players. But if the GM makes that decision, or the luck of the draw make that decision, I'm sure that's fine with him. What I'm telling you, Stephen A., is I get his mentality, but the world has changed. LeBron James has empowered players and kind of changed the culture around that enough where they don't have to just rely on the fact that they got drafted luckily or to a team with a good GM. They can take control of their own fate. And if
with the way that the mentality around free agency has changed, how it's metamorphosized since the early to mid-90s when players first started to really utilize it en masse, you have to expect as a player that when you join a franchise, that is not going to be the franchise that you retire with. There's going to be very, very few players in the NBA or the NFL that are going to retire on the team that they were drafted by, especially retire without any break in their participation on that team. Like, you may get drafted by a team and then leave, go somewhere else, and then come back to the team that drafted you to end your career if you're all-time great. I mean, hell, look at Peyton Manning, LeBron James. These are all-time great performers in their sport, and they left their teams. Some of them left because they were forced out. Some of them left because they chose to leave. But if you're a CJ McCollum, you have to let go of that loyalty mentality to a team or to a city. Because if they decide that they want to trade you for a better shooting guard, they're going to do so. What if the Portland Trail Blazers had been negotiating with the Toronto Raptors for DeMar DeRozan? Do you think that Portland's going to say no to that deal unless they feel like CJ's a better player? They're not going to say, no, we're loyal to CJ. They're going to say, no, we like CJ as a better fit for this team than DeMar would be. And that's all it comes down to. So, as they say, big bank takes little bank.
And if they don't happen to wind up on a good team, they can create
Stay right
one.
there. Stay right there. Because that's what CJ McCollum is speaking of when he uses the word disgusting. yes, you can't control what a general manager does, what an owner does, if they have your rights. And you can't control you feeling the need to grab your money while you can because you're not a free agent yet, and you look at the landscape and the money may not potentially be there for you if you don't grab it at the moment that you elect to grab it. Those are things that are out of your control. You have to adjust and adapt to the circumstances that are presented to you. But when you are a player, when you are a competitor, and you make the choice, having an abundance of choices available at your disposal, you make the conscientious choice to join forces as opposed to competing against those stars on your level to solidify and validate your greatness. You're going to have others amongst your contemporaries that have a problem with that because they're saying, damn, what we should be is spread out, all butting heads with one another, trying to make it happen, particularly with the money that we're getting. It's not like joining forces, oh, that's the only way to get money. In today's NBA, the average salary is over $5.5 million. Guys are signing deals for over $200 million. So you're getting the money and still electing to join forces instead of competing, and a player has a right to have a problem with that.
Well, he has the right to have a problem with that if he's not a great player. Because if you're not a great player, you're not going to be recruited for a super team. Once again, I keep returning to this theme. I don't think that it's a coincidence that we keep hearing the same names for these super team recruitments. Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James. I think that people pretty much leave Steph Curry alone because they know that he just has lifelong Golden State Warrior written all over him because of his image and the family, as well as what he brings to the table. He's just box office, as Stephen A. Smith would say. But when we're talking about counting other players' money and the decisions that they make, you have to decide what exactly you want to evaluate about these players. Because years ago, we said that the players were just playing for money. They were not concerned about winning. Now they're showing you that they're more concerned with going to winning atmospheres and good franchises than they are a couple of $1 million. So you may have to reevaluate your initial observations or assertions when it comes to that issue, because they're not jibing. They're not coming together properly.
Here's the problem. The narrative that we've pushed, start maybe with David Stern was largely responsible for this, but I think largely we think good things about this. The narrative that was pushed in the NBA and across sports is that the most important thing should be the championship. You should win championships, and only then is your greatness truly validated. So players are now kind of reverse engineering their greatness. They know they're a terrific player. They don't have enough terrific players around them to win a championship. And in spite of all the money they get, Stephen A., some of them say, that's not good enough for me. I drank the Kool-Aid. I believe I need to win a championship. And they look around the landscape and say, there's a super team there, there's a super team there, and if I don't even either get on one or form my own, I ain't going to win a championship. And then Stephen A. and Max are going to be talking about how I'm not as great as this other guy because I don't have a championship.
Yeah, I guess he's not succumbing to that pressure, though. I understand what he's saying. He's got a point.
There is no pressure. Once again, Molly Karam, there's nothing for him to succumb to or not succumb to because they don't want CJ McCollum on a super team. That's why I made the analogy when I started this video. He's that chick that heard her homegirl say that she thinks that a guy is cute. Now all of a sudden she thinks the guy is cute, but she's not going to admit it because she knows the guy's never going to like her because she's not good looking enough for the guy to like her. That's why the guy wants her friend. The guy don't want you because you're not good looking enough. But you like the guy. You would go for him, even though you know he slept with a bunch of girls already. You'd go for him just to say that you slept with him, to boost up your ego. Believe me, if the Golden State Warriors called up CJ McCollum and said, we want you here, he would sign with them. It is what it is. Peace.